The dog was back. Jack Mercer knew it before he even stepped outside. He felt it like a pressure in the air, a shift in the static of the silence he'd come so far to find. The floorboards of the old farmhouse creaked under his boots as he crossed the kitchen and opened the front door, shotgun cradled lazily in one arm, coffee steaming in the other. Across the field, maybe 80 yards out, the dog was digging again. Same spot. Same slow, methodical rhythm. Left paw, right paw, nose down, tail stiff. Even from this distance, Jack could see the blood on its paws, dark smears on the half-frozen earth. The dog didn't seem to notice, or care. Jack didn't know why, but that unsettled him more than anything else. This was the third morning in a row. The first time he'd seen the German Shepherd gray and white ribs like a washboard under its thick coat. It had just been watching him. Not barking, not growling, just watching like a soldier on overwatch, patient and still. That was 12 days ago. Now it had become a ritual. The dog appeared with the mist each morning, dug furiously into the frozen patch behind the barn, then disappeared before sunset. It refused food, wouldn't come close, but it kept digging. At first, Jack had tried to ignore it. This was his silence after all. He'd bought that silence in cash 3 counties away under a fake name he didn't even care to remember. He'd found this stretch of forgotten land online, a bank foreclosure in the deep woods of West Virginia, not an address so much as a set of GPS coordinates. It was perfect, until the dog showed up. Jack squinted into the fog, took a slow sip from his cup, and muttered to himself, "You're gonna dig yourself into hell, you keep that up." The dog paused just for a second, then went back to work. That night, the wind howled like it had teeth. The farmhouse with its broken windows and sagging porch creaked and groaned like a ship at sea. Jack lay awake in the dark, eyes on the ceiling, one hand resting near the knife on his nightstand. Old habits. Useless now, but hard to kill. Sleep didn't come easy in this house. Not with the memories. Afghanistan. 2 tours. 1 broken body. 4 dead brothers. And a decision he'd never forgiven himself for. That's what he'd really come out here for, not peace, not really. Punishment. He rolled over and stared out the cracked window. The dog was still out there. He could see it, barely its silhouette under a cloud-covered moon. Still digging, still bleeding, still refusing to quit. A low hum of unease settled into Jack's chest. He'd seen obsession before in men and himself. But in a dog, this wasn't right. This wasn't just instinct. This was purpose. The next morning, Jack stood over the hole. It was deeper than he thought, almost 3 feet now, jagged and wide. The ground around it was littered with dirt, clods, stones, and dried grass. No sign of gophers or rabbits. No bones. No burrows. Just the dog. It stood a few feet away, chest heaving, its tongue lolling out the side of its mouth. Jack had never seen an animal look exhausted and determined at the same time. But that was the only way to describe it. The dog looked at him, he looked, and let out a low, breathless whine. "Jesus," Jack muttered. "What the hell are you chasing?" No collar. No tag. Its paws were torn raw, bleeding into the cold soil. Any normal dog would have stopped days ago. But this one had something to prove. Jack turned, walked back to the barn, and dug through the back of an old footlocker. Inside, wrapped in oilcloth and memory, was his old metal detector, military issue, same one he'd used clearing paths through minefields a lifetime ago. He hadn't touched it in years. He didn't want to. But something in that dog's eyes pulled the soldier back to the surface. All right, he muttered. Let's see what's got you all worked up. He swept the detector in a slow, even arc, just as he'd been trained. Left to right. Overlap by 50%. Listen for the noise that meant something big and not buried trash or tractor parts. At first there was nothing but static. Then, as he passed over the center of the hole, a scream. Not a beep, not a blip. A sustained, high-pitched tone that filled his headset and vibrated in his bones. Jack froze. Pulled back. Silence. Swept again. The scream returned. Oh shit, he whispered. He stood there staring down into the ragged pit, his knuckles white around the detector. Shadow, because the name had finally settled, stood beside him, tail low, ears up, eyes sharp. The dog wasn't excited. He was waiting. Jack exhaled slowly. The breath fogged in front of him. Something's down there. That night, Jack couldn't stop pacing. He'd tried to tell himself it was probably just an old septic tank or a buried oil drum. Farmers buried shit all the time. But something about that signal, too flat, too big, too uniform, told him this wasn't farm equipment. It was something else. Shadow lay near the back door, tail thumping once whenever Jack passed. No more digging. His work, it seemed, was done. Now it was Jack's turn. He stood on the porch and looked out at the moonlit field. You don't come this far into the mountains unless you're running from something or toward it. He wasn't sure which one he was doing anymore. The next morning, Jack would dig. Not because he wanted to, but because he had to. That dog had crossed hundreds of miles through God knows what terrain to get here, to this patch of earth. It wasn't a coincidence. It was a message. He just hadn't figured out what it was yet. The ground was frozen just beneath the surface, but Jack didn't stop digging. He grunted through the cold morning air, muscles stiff, and aching breath, puffing like smoke with every exhale. Shadow lay beside the hole, silent tail sweeping back and forth in slow motion. Watching. Always watching. Jack tossed another shovelful of dirt behind him and hit something hard. He paused. Kneeling, he brushed away the earth with gloved fingers. Metal. He scraped gently along the surface, flat, rusted, painted white once upon a time. It stretched further than he expected. He followed the curve downward and realized it wasn't a tank. It was wider. A door, maybe. He stepped back. His gut twisted. Not fear training. That same low thrum in his chest he used to get before a mission when something wasn't right but hadn't been said out loud yet. Shadow let out a low huff. Not a bark. Just breath. Like he was saying, "You're close." Jack stared at the soil-stained metal mind racing. It could be an old trailer. A shipping container. Hell, it could be some forgotten storm shelter. But the detector still pinged consistently over the entire area. He wasn't sure yet, but it felt too clean, too square. He stood up slowly and looked down at Shadow. You knew this was here, didn't you? The dog blinked once, unbothered, as if to say, Of course I did. Jack sighed. You're not just some stray, are you? He studied the shepherd more closely now in the daylight. Strong build, cropped ears, still alert despite exhaustion. There was a cold intelligence in those amber eyes, not wild but trained, methodical. On a hunch, Jack crouched beside him and gently lifted one ear. There it was. Faint, worn, nearly illegible, but unmistakable. Tattooed numbers. LK-477. A military working dog ID. Jack sat back on his heels, heart dropping into his stomach. Holy hell. He hadn't seen one of those since Kabul. Back then, he'd helped run a K9 unit that handled bomb detection. Half the dogs they worked with were smarter than their handlers. Loyal to a fault. Brave like nothing else. They weren't pets, they were soldiers. Shadow, if that was his name now, was one of them. No wonder he dug like he had orders to follow. Jack stared at the metal beneath the dirt. The coincidence was too clean. A military dog. A buried structure. A man with combat instincts trying to pretend he wasn't still on edge every damn second of the day. "You're not lost," Jack said, voice low. "You're on a mission." Shadow shifted, ears twitching. He laid his head on his paws, content. Jack stood, wiped his hands on his jeans, and stared out at the surrounding woods. The wind stirred the trees like whispers. The whole damn place suddenly felt like it had eyes. Whatever was buried here, it wasn't just junk. He could feel it in the back of his teeth. Something wrong. Something important. He needed more information. Back inside the farmhouse, Jack sat at the kitchen table with his old dust-covered laptop. No internet out here, but he'd downloaded a lot of military directories before disconnecting. He searched LK-477. It took some time. The system was old clunky. But finally, there it was. Military Working Dog MWD. Shadow Breed German Shepherd Unit. 4th Infantry Division. Afghanistan. Deployment. Handler Sergeant Michael Arlen, Kaya, 2012. Status retired. Honorably discharged, 2016. Jack leaned back in his chair. Well, I'll be damned. Sergeant Arlen had died in a roadside ambush. Jack remembered the news. That unit had taken heavy losses. Shadow must have been reassigned or returned to the States. Retired. Lost in the system. Yet here he was, 6 years later, digging in a stranger's yard like he was still on patrol, which meant he'd either seen something or remembered something. Dogs didn't operate on memory the way humans did, but Shadow clearly hadn't picked this spot by accident. Maybe he'd been trained here before. Maybe he followed someone. Or maybe... Jack turned back to the military file. Last known address for Shadow's retirement placement. Whitmore family, Logan County, West Virginia. His blood ran cold. Whitmore. That was the name on the ID he'd pulled from the nurse's bag. Emily Whitmore. There was no chance in hell that was coincidence. Jack stood abruptly. The chair scraped across the wooden floor. His boots pounded across the room as he pulled open the drawer where he'd left the bag from the hole. He opened it now with new eyes. Old gauze, rusted scissors, faded bandages, and a cracked leather name tag with hospital insignia. E. Whitmore, R.N. It hit him like a brick. This wasn't random. Shadow had come here because of her. Had followed her scent, had been with her, had been trying all this time to lead someone to where she was buried. Jack stumbled backward and sat down hard in the chair. "What the hell happened to you, Emily?" he whispered. He picked up the dog tag again, hands trembling slightly. He didn't believe in fate. He'd seen too many good people get torn to pieces for no reason. But this felt like it was supposed to happen. Jack looked at Shadow, who had followed him inside, and now lay by the back door, eyes open but calm. "You waited this long for someone to listen, huh?" Jack said softly. The dog didn't move, didn't have to. Jack felt it. A weight drop into his chest like sand filling a bag. He didn't know this woman, didn't know her story, but he knew the look in that dog's eyes. He'd seen it in every mirror since the war. Someone needed help. and no one had come. Until now. The light was starting to fade when Jack went back outside. He stared down into the hole now deeper than 4 feet and looked again at the buried metal. If it was what he thought it was, he'd need to dig carefully, slowly, respectfully, because this wasn't just a secret anymore. It was a grave. He didn't sleep that night. Instead, he sat at the window, the cassette recorder in his hand. The one he'd found in the nurse's bag. He hadn't turned it on yet. He wasn't ready. But tomorrow he would be. Shadow lay by the door, ears flicking in the dark, and Jack, he finally stopped trying to shut everything out. Tomorrow he'd listen to what Emily Whitmore had to say. Because if Shadow had led him this far, it meant she still had something to tell, and he was finally ready to hear it. The sun broke late over the hills, light slow to spill through the dense branches lining the edge of the field. Jack was already at the dig site, sleeves rolled, gloves tight, eyes grim. The cold bit at his skin, but he didn't feel it anymore. All he could think about was what lay beneath. Shadow sat at the edge of the hole, tail tucked alert. The shepherd hadn't moved much all night, just kept watch. And now as Jack worked, Shadow stayed still, breathing heavy gaze fixed on the dirt, like it was something sacred. The hole was deep now, past 4 feet, creeping toward 5. Jack moved methodically, not rushing. Every scoop of dirt had weight, not just physical, but moral. He wasn't digging for treasure. He was uncovering a story someone tried hard to erase. And he had a feeling it wasn't going to end well. The shovel hit metal again, louder this time. He dropped to one knee, brushed more soil away, and saw a seam. Then a hinge. Then the faint curve of a door handle. Jack's breath caught. "Jesus," he whispered, running a hand over the cold surface. "It's a damn vehicle." Shadow huffed low, shifting on his paws. Jack cleared more dirt and finally found the emblem. A rusted, dirt-caked red cross. Ambulance. Not a car. Not a storage bin. A buried medical transport vehicle. Whatever this was, it wasn't accidental. Someone had gone to a hell of a lot of effort to make it disappear. Jack stared for a long time, jaw tight, mind racing. Whoever buried this knew what they were doing. They weren't hiding a car, they were hiding what was inside it. He grabbed his crowbar from the porch and returned to the site. The rear doors were partially jammed dirt, having compacted around the seams, but Jack worked carefully, prying, jiggling, loosening edges little by little. It took nearly an hour before the left door creaked open with a sound like a scream. Jack froze. The smell hit him first. Damp metal mildew and something else, the sharp, sour rot of time. He didn't want to look. But he made himself inside the ambulance. The light barely reached, but enough filtered in to show the outlines: a dusty stretcher, overturned supply boxes, tangled sheets, and a form. Still, curled, shrouded in what remained of a nurse's uniform, brittle with age. A skeletal hand reached out from the far corner, fingers bent, as if grasping for something that never came. Jack swallowed. Hard. His knees almost buckled. He'd seen death, too much of it, but this felt personal in a way the battlefield never did. This woman hadn't died in combat. She'd died in silence, buried, forgotten, discarded. And yet someone, some damn loyal dog, had remembered. He took a slow, careful step inside. The structure groaned beneath his weight, but held. He crouched near the remains, eyes stinging. He wasn't sure if it was dust or guilt. On the floor next to her was a cracked leather medical bag. Jack picked it up gently, setting it outside on the grass. Then he noticed a second object tucked near her elbow, a small cassette recorder, scuffed and faded, but intact. His hands shook as he lifted it. Outside, Shadow whimpered softly. Jack stepped out of the ambulance and sat on the edge of the dig site, both items in his lap. The cold wind cut through his shirt, but he didn't move. He looked at the recorder and whispered the words like a confession. Whatever's down there, that dog thinks it matters more than food, sleep, maybe even his own life. He didn't press play yet. Not yet. Instead, he turned to the medical bag. The latch was rusted, but popped open after a bit of coaxing. Inside were brittle gauze pads, a stethoscope with a cracked diaphragm, and a small plastic sleeve holding an old, faded hospital ID. Emily Whitmore, RN, St. Joseph's Free Clinic, Logan County, WV. He stared at the photo. She couldn't have been more than 25. Blonde, soft eyes, bright smile. She'd probably meant to save lives. And instead, someone had taken hers and gone to great lengths to make sure no one would ever know. Jack turned the ID over in his hands and felt something catch under his finger. Taped to the back was a folded photograph. He unfolded it carefully. It showed Emily standing in front of the clinic, wearing the same uniform as in the ID. Beside her stood a man, mid-30s, expensive coat, arm around her shoulders. The photo had faded, but not enough to hide the eyes, or the jawline. Jack didn't recognize him, but he would soon. He slipped the picture into his coat pocket, then reached down and picked up the cassette recorder again. This time he clicked it on. A soft click, then static, then a voice. Shaky. Female. If you're hearing this, it means I was right to be afraid. Jack's stomach twisted. Emily's voice filled the silence, fragile but determined. She spoke about her work at the clinic, her passion for helping the poor in the county, her growing fear of someone powerful who'd started visiting her regularly. A man who smiled too wide, who talked about fixing things, who offered her money, and when she refused, threats. She named him Charles Beckett. The name echoed through Jack like a rifle shot. The Beckett family, he'd heard the name tossed around at the diner his first week in town. They owned land, controlled the local development board, made donations to the sheriff's re-election campaigns. Old money. Old secrets. And if Emily was telling the truth, which considering the bones in the ambulance seemed likely, then Charles Beckett had every reason to make her disappear. The final moments of the tape were hard to hear. Emily's voice rising, her footsteps quickening, breath catching. He's here. Oh God. He found me. He's not supposed to. Then silence. Nothing else. Just the dead air of time that stretched on far too long. Jack sat in the dirt, the wind pressing against his back, and stared into the trees. This wasn't just a grave. It was a crime scene. He stood slowly, wiped the dirt from his jeans, and looked down at Shadow. You didn't just find a body, he said quietly. You found a murder. Shadow didn't move, just stared into the trees like he'd known all along. Jack picked up the recorder, the bag, and the ID. He wasn't a cop, wasn't an investigator. But he was a man who owed a lot of ghosts, and maybe this time he could pay one of them back. Tomorrow he'd call the sheriff, because someone else needed to hear that tape, and because he wasn't going to be the second person buried for knowing the truth. The cassette hissed before the voice began again. Static crackled through the small farmhouse kitchen, filling the air like a ghost trying to speak through a storm. Jack Mercer sat at the table, eyes fixed on the old recorder, his calloused thumb hovering just above the rewind button. He had listened to the first part of Emily Whitmore's tape 3 times since dawn. Each replay hit harder. Each word dug under his skin like a splinter he couldn't pull out. If you're hearing this, it means I was right to be afraid. The voice was softer this time, quieter through the worn speakers, like she was speaking directly to him now. Jack felt the words in his chest, heavy and real. He pressed the recorder closer to his ear. My name is Emily Whitmore. I work at St. Joseph's Free Clinic in Logan County. If something happens to me, it's because of Charles Beckett. Please, someone has to tell the truth. Jack's throat tightened. The name still echoed from the night before. Beckett. He'd seen it carved into storefronts on the fire department's donation wall, even the local church plaque, the Beckett Family Foundation. They were everywhere in this county. Emily's voice trembled as she continued. He said he could help the clinic bring funding new equipment. But there were conditions. He didn't like hearing no. When I refused him, he changed. He said I didn't understand who I was talking to. There was a pause, then a shaky breath. He said he'd ruin me first, then make me disappear. I thought he was bluffing. I thought people like him just threatened to feel powerful. But last night, he followed me home. He was drunk. He said if I ever talked about what he did at the clinic, he'd... The tape skipped, then silence. Jack rewound it half an inch, thumb shaking. When he hit play again, the next sound was frantic movement, footsteps maybe, a gasp, the scrape of something metal hitting the floor. He's here. Oh God. He found me. He's not supposed to... The tape cut off. No sound followed but the hiss of blank magnetic air. Jack sat motionless for nearly a full minute, listening to the silence as if it might give him the rest of her sentence. But it didn't. When he finally spoke, his voice was low, almost reverent. If you're hearing this, it means I was right to be afraid. He clicked the recorder off and stared out the window. Morning light slanted across the yard, catching the edges of the old hole he and Shadow had dug. From here, it looked like a wound that refused to close. He poured himself coffee he didn't want, trying not to think. The logical part of him said to call the sheriff and be done with it. Turn it all in. Walk away. But another voice, the one that had gotten louder since the war, kept saying something different. People buried truth for a reason. And sometimes the only way to dig it up was to risk getting buried with it. By noon, Jack drove his old Chevy into town. It was a 25-minute trip down winding roads through thick pine and ash. He hadn't been into town since he bought the property. He didn't like people, didn't trust them to leave him alone. But this wasn't about him anymore. He parked near the sheriff's office, engine ticking in the cold, and sat for a while before getting out. Shadow sat in the passenger seat, head on the dash, eyes following every movement on the street. Stay, Jack muttered. I won't be long. The dog didn't move, but Jack swore he understood. Inside the office smelled of old coffee and dust. 2 deputies sat at desks buried under paperwork, one of them half asleep in front of a computer screen. Behind the counter, a woman looked up. Can I help you, sir? Jack cleared his throat. I need to speak with Sheriff McKinney. Tell him it's about a missing person. The woman frowned. You mean a recent case? No, Jack said. Not recent at all. Sheriff Earl McKinney looked like he'd been carved out of the same hills that surrounded the town, broad shoulders, lined face, and a slow, careful way of speaking that made you feel like every word had to pass inspection before leaving his mouth. He listened without interrupting, as Jack told him everything: the digging dog, the metal detector, the ambulance, the body, the tape. When Jack finished, the sheriff leaned back, rubbing his chin. Emily Whitmore, he said finally. God almighty. That's a name I haven't heard in nearly 30 years. You knew her, Jack asked. Everyone did, McKinney said. She worked at the free clinic like you said. Went missing in the summer of '94. Case went nowhere. No leads, no body, no motive anyone wanted to believe. You mean no motive anyone wanted to touch, Jack said. The sheriff's eyes flicked up sharp. You've done your homework. Her tape did it for me. McKinney sighed. Beckett was untouchable back then. Still is to some degree. His family's been running this county since before my granddad was born. When Emily vanished, half the town said she ran away with him. Other half said she was depressed. Either way, nobody wanted to dig. Jack looked him dead in the eye. I already did. The sheriff didn't flinch, but something in his expression softened. You bring me that tape. Jack nodded. You'll open the case, I'll reopen the damn file, McKinney said, standing up. But we'll need to be careful. Beckett's got friends in high places. If this leaks before we have proof, he'll bury it again, and us along with it. Jack hesitated. What about the dog? McKinney blinked. The dog? He found her, Jack said. Or whatever's left of her. He was military retired working dog. Same one assigned to her family, maybe. Shadow's been digging there for days like he knew where she was. The sheriff's gaze lingered on him, then he nodded slowly. That's one loyal animal. Jack's voice dropped barely above a whisper. He's the only one who didn't forget. McKinney drove out to the property that afternoon. He brought one deputy camera's evidence bags. Together they documented everything: the ambulance, the ID, the cassette, even the soil layers. When the body was lifted from the wreck, the sheriff took off his hat and said a quiet prayer. Jack stood beside him silent. Shadow sat nearby, ears, flat eyes, following the movements with mournful patience. For a long time, none of them spoke. Finally, McKinney said, You know what this means, right? Jack nodded. Yeah. Someone's going to want to make this go away again. The sheriff gave him a weary smile. Let them try. They covered the site and loaded the remains for transfer to the county morgue. As the trucks pulled away, the field grew quiet again. Jack knelt beside Shadow, scratching behind the dog's ear. You did good, boy. The shepherd didn't wag his tail. He just leaned into Jack's hand, eyes half-lidded with exhaustion. Jack looked toward the dirt road leading back to town. In the distance, he could almost see the glint of a car parked too long at the bend. Watching. Waiting. He muttered, Guess the bastards already know. Shadow's ears twitched. Jack stood brushing the dirt from his jeans. He knew what came next. He'd found the truth buried under 6 feet of earth. Now he had to survive long enough to tell it. Tomorrow he'd visit the woman Sheriff McKinney mentioned, the one who'd known Emily best. Maybe Maggie Sloan could tell him what Emily had been afraid of before she disappeared. And maybe finally he'd understand just how deep this county's rot went. Rain rolled in by dawn. Not a downpour, just that cold Appalachian drizzle that sank into your clothes and made the trees look like they were crying. Jack Mercer didn't bother with a jacket. The wet didn't bother him anymore. Not today. Shadow trotted behind him, ears alert, paws silent on gravel. They moved down Main Street like two ghosts that didn't know they were dead. Logan County looked the same as always: dusty shops closed, signs that hadn't flipped in months, trucks idling outside diners where the old men kept secrets and coffee flowed like gossip. Jack crossed the street and stopped in front of a weather-beaten house with a hand-painted mailbox, M. Sloan. He took a breath and knocked once. No answer. Then again. Still nothing. He was about to turn away when the door creaked open and a pair of sharp gray eyes narrowed at him from behind the screen. I'm not buying anything, the woman said. Jack lifted his hands. I'm not selling. A pause. Then you, the one who found her. Jack didn't have to ask who she meant. He just nodded. Maggie Sloane opened the screen door and stepped aside. Come in. I've been waiting 30 years for this. The inside smelled like old books, strong tea, and something floral he couldn't place. Maggie moved slow, but with purpose, every step measured like someone who'd learned to carry weight people didn't see. Jack sat at her kitchen table while she poured tea into two mismatched mugs. She didn't ask what he took in it, just set it down and folded herself into the chair across from him. Shadow curled up by the door, watching, always watching. Maggie didn't smile, didn't fidget, just stared at him unblinking. So she said, "Who told you to come here, Sheriff McKinney?" Jack answered. "Said you were the only person Emily trusted." Maggie let out a small laugh, more air than sound. She trusted too easily, she said. That was her curse. Thought everyone had good in them, even monsters in suits. Jack pulled the photograph from his pocket and slid it across the table. Maggie looked at it. Her jaw clenched. "I took that," she said. Day they announced funding for the clinic. Charles Beckett came with his fake promises and his checkbook full of strings. She mentioned him on the tape, Jack said. Maggie flinched. "So it's real?" "You heard it," Jack nodded. "She told me she was scared," Maggie whispered. "Told me he cornered her in the back hallway one night. Said things that made her sick. When she threatened to go public, he told her she'd vanish and no one would remember her name." "She didn't back down," Jack said. "No," Maggie replied. "She didn't. That's what got her killed." She looked away, blinking fast. Jack waited. He knew grief had no schedule. After a moment, she stood and walked over to a drawer, pulling out a yellowed folder. She dropped it in front of him. "What's this?" he asked. "Emily kept records," Maggie said. "Copies of patient logs, prescriptions Beckett forced the clinic to fill under fake names. Painkillers, mostly. Oxyfentanyl stuff he sold off the books through a network of dirty doctors. She found out, threatened to go to the board. That's when everything changed." Jack opened the folder and scanned the documents. Faked names, forged signatures, patient notes that didn't match real people. It was a goldmine of criminal evidence if anyone had the balls to act on it. Maggie leaned in, voice low. "She hid that folder in my house the night before she vanished. Told me if anything happened to her, to burn it. But I couldn't. I couldn't let her be forgotten." Jack nodded slowly. "You did the right thing." Maggie's lips pressed tight. Didn't stop him, though. Didn't stop the machine he built. Jack set the folder aside and looked at her. "Do you know who else was involved?" Maggie hesitated. "Names. Maggie. We can't just point fingers at shadows." She took a long sip of tea, then said, "Start with Marcus Creed. Runs the county records now. Back then, he was Beckett's little lapdog. Moved money, buried complaints, rewrote zoning laws so Beckett could develop half the valley." Jack's fingers curled into fists. "That name keeps coming up. You'll find it on everything crooked in this town," she said. "But if you're going after him, be careful." He stood. "I'm not going after him yet. I just want to know what Emily died for." Maggie rose too, eyes suddenly fierce. "She died because this town is rotten, Mr. Mercer. It's been feeding off silence for generations. You stir this pot too hard, it'll burn everyone." Jack gave her a long, level look. "I'm not afraid of fire," he said. She nodded slowly. Then you better be ready to get burned. Back outside, Jack slid into the truck and stared through the windshield. The rain had lightened to a mist, but the weight of the day pressed harder than ever. He looked at the folder on the seat beside him, then down at Shadow. "You knew," he said. "That woman meant something to you." Shadow stared ahead, unmoving. Jack pulled onto the main road, engine rattling over gravel. As he drove, he passed the diner, the hardware store, the church with the Beckett plaque gleaming in the gray light. So much money, so many lies polished into respectability. Jack felt something shift inside him, not rage, not yet. Something colder, cleaner, purpose. By nightfall, he was back at the farmhouse, lights off, windows locked. He poured a drink, opened Maggie's folder again, and cross-referenced the fake prescriptions with the county health database he still had on his hard drive. Most of the names didn't exist. But 3 did. All deceased. All overdoses. All tied back to prescriptions allegedly filled by Emily's clinic months after she vanished. He sat back, cold sweat prickling the back of his neck. They hadn't just silenced her. They'd kept using her name to push product even after she was in the ground. That wasn't just murder. It was desecration. He closed the folder and looked at the fire crackling in the hearth. "You stir this pot too hard, it'll burn everyone." He took a slow breath and whispered into the dark. Then let it burn. Tomorrow, he'd find Marcus Creed. Because now he knew Emily's death wasn't just about power. It was about profit. And someone had made a fortune off her grave. Jack waited in his truck engine, idling low in the parking lot outside the Logan County Recorder's office. It was almost noon, but the building looked like it hadn't seen sunlight in decades. Gray paint peeled off the bricks, and a single flickering bulb buzzed just above the entryway. Across the seat, Shadow rested his head on Jack's thigh, calm but alert. The dog hadn't barked once since they arrived, but his eyes never left the front door. Jack knew better than to walk in blind, not with the name Marcus Creed on his mind. According to Maggie, Creed had been Beckett's fixer. The man who filed false permits, lost complaints, and shuffled enough paper to bury 100 truths. Jack didn't know if he was still dirty, but he was going to find out. He stepped out, locking eyes with Shadow. "Stay. If I'm not out in 20, come find me." Shadow huffed low and quiet. Inside the office was even more outdated than the exterior. Rows of metal filing cabinets lined the walls, half-labeled with fading tape. A ceiling fan spun lazily above, rattling with every turn. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, adding to the slow drip migraine forming behind Jack's eyes. At the far end of the room sat Marcus Creed, hair slicked back with too much gel suit 2 sizes too tight, and a smile stretched wide enough to lie through. He looked up from a dusty ledger and squinted. "Well, hell. You ain't from around here, are you?" "Nope," Jack replied, stepping closer. "But I've been here long enough to know a name when it keeps showing up in all the wrong places." Creed leaned back, still grinning. "Is that right? You come in here to make trouble or just talk riddles?" Jack tossed the manila folder on his desk, the one Maggie gave him. Creed's smile didn't waver, but his fingers hesitated before reaching for it. "What's this?" Jack's voice was even. "Proof that you helped Charles Beckett forge medical records, reroute funds, and cover up at least 3 overdoses linked to the St. Joseph's Free Clinic. You want to keep playing dumb, or should I keep going?" Creed opened the folder and scanned the first few pages. His jaw tightened. Not enough to break the facade, but enough for Jack to notice. "You've got no idea what you're poking at, stranger," Creed said slowly. "There's a reason no one's said Emily Whitmore's name in almost 30 years. Jack didn't blink. "Yeah, because men like you made sure no one could." Creed leaned in now, eyes hardening. You got no clue who Charles Beckett really is. He's not just a developer or a rich boy with too much land. He's legacy. His great-grandfather built this county. The Beckett name's in the courthouse bricks and the water board bylaws. You think you're going to take him down with a few dusty records? No, Jack said. But they're not all I've got. He pulled the cassette recorder from his coat pocket and set it next to the folder. Creed's face twitched like he'd just seen a ghost. She talked, Jack said. Before she died, she left a message. On that tape, she named names, yours included. Creed stared at the recorder like it might bite. I don't want to bury you, Marcus, Jack added. But if you make me choose between your reputation and her truth, I'll bury the tape in every courtroom and press office in the state. Creed stood up, fast chair scraping hard behind him. You think this is some noble crusade, some black and white war story where the good guy wins in the end? He leaned across the desk. In this town, truth doesn't matter, only who controls it. Jack didn't flinch. Then maybe it's time someone else did. Creed's nostrils flared. He glanced toward the back office, then lowered his voice. There's something you don't know, something Emily didn't live long enough to find out. Jack narrowed his eyes. What Creed looked torn for a second, then shook his head. No, I've already said too much. He shoved the folder back at Jack. Take your righteous fire and get the hell out of my office. I'm not going down for any of this. Jack grabbed the folder, and the recorder eyes locked on Creed. You already are, he said, then turned and walked out. By the time he got back to the truck, Shadow was sitting up, tail flicking with anticipation. Jack slid behind the wheel and started the engine. He's scared, he muttered. Scared enough to talk, just not scared enough to help. He pulled out of the lot and headed for the edge of town. He needed time to think. An hour later, he was at Maggie Sloane's house again. She opened the door with a look that said she hadn't slept since his last visit. You talked to Creed? She asked. Jack nodded. He knows something. Something Emily didn't get a chance to say. Maggie motioned him inside, lips pursed. I've heard whispers, she said. Back then, before Emily disappeared, she mentioned something about land contracts. Beckett was trying to push through zoning changes for a new development. Said it didn't make sense. That he was building where no one wanted to live. Jack frowned. You think the clinic was just a front? Maggie nodded. Not just the clinic. The whole valley, Jack. Beckett was using it to move more than just pills. He was laundering through shell companies using the clinic's charity work to cover it all. Jack felt the weight of it settle in. So if Emily figured that out, she became a liability, Maggie finished. He rubbed his jaw, thinking. Creed had danced around it. Maggie had just confirmed it. Beckett wasn't just a predator, he was a businessman, hiding behind philanthropy and real estate. And now Jack had evidence that could crack it open. One name at a time. That night, Jack sat on his porch, Shadow at his feet. The mountains breathing mist through the trees like the land itself was hiding secrets. He played the tape again. Not because he needed to hear it, but because he owed it to her. Each time the same final line clung to his ribs. He's here. Oh God. He found me. Jack stared out into the dark. If Beckett was willing to silence a nurse to keep his pipeline running, there was no telling what else he'd done, or who else had helped. He'd need help now. More than Maggie. More than the sheriff. He needed someone who could trace shell companies and financial trails. And he knew just the person. Tomorrow he'd make a call to someone he hadn't spoken to in years. Noah Tillman, ex-Intel analyst. now a washed-up cybersecurity contractor living off-grid in Tennessee. If anyone could follow the money, it was Noah. And if they were going to bring Beckett down, it was time to stop digging and start burning the whole rotten system to the ground. The cabin sat deep in the Smoky Mountains, half hidden behind a wall of pine and fog. No road signs, no mailbox, no number on the rusted gate. You either knew how to find Noah Tillman or you didn't, and Jack Mercer knew. He parked the truck just off a narrow gravel trail and killed the engine. The only sound was the hiss of cooling metal and Shadow's quiet breath beside him. Jack stepped out, feeling the crunch of damp gravel beneath his boots, then looked toward the one-story shack barely visible through the trees. Smoke curled from the chimney. He's home. Jack walked slow, deliberately, his hands where anyone watching could see them. You didn't sneak up on a guy like Noah. Not if you liked your knees intact. 50 feet from the door, a voice rang out sharp as a rifle crack. "Stop right there." Jack froze. "I come in peace," he called back. "With bourbon." A long pause. Then the voice again, lower this time. "Jack Mercer. I thought you were dead." "Not yet." The door creaked open, and Noah Tillman stepped out onto the porch. He looked exactly the same tall, lean face, like cracked leather hair gone completely silver. He wore a hoodie, cargo pants, and slippers that looked like they hadn't moved since the Bush administration. In one hand, he held a rifle. In the other, a mug. "You brought the good stuff?" he asked. Jack lifted the brown paper bag and shook it. 12-year single barrel. Noah grunted. "Good man. Get your ass inside." The inside of Noah's cabin was exactly as Jack remembered controlled chaos. Maps pinned to the walls. 2 ancient laptops glowing softly beneath a tangle of wires. Canned food stacked next to ammo boxes. And a black cat perched on top of a CRT monitor, like it was the queen of the world. Jack poured 2 glasses, while Noah sank into a battered recliner and pointed at a folding chair across from him. "Let me guess," Noah said, swirling the bourbon. "This ain't just a social call." Jack set the folder on the table between them. "You ever hear of Charles Beckett?" Noah's brow furrowed. "The real estate guy from West Virginia." "Yeah. His family's been laundering money through Shell LLCs for years. I even flagged him in a whistleblower case back in '09. Whole thing got buried." Jack raised an eyebrow. "Buried by who Feds said insufficient evidence, which is code for someone got paid." Noah took a slow sip. "Why you in bed with him, I found a body," Jack said flatly. "A nurse named Emily Whitmore. Disappeared 30 years ago. She tried to expose him." Noah blinked. "Wait, that Emily Whitmore. The clinic whistleblower." "She left a cassette," Jack said, setting it down. "Named Beckett, named his fixer, Marcus Creed, and hinted at something bigger. Now I've got documents linking them to a string of overdoses and property scams across Logan County." Noah stared at him for a beat, then leaned forward. "You realize you just kicked the hornet's nest, right?" Jack nodded. "It's buzzing." Noah cracked his neck. "All right. You want receipts? I'll get you receipts. Give me 72 hours and everything you've got. Tape names, locations, financial docs. If Beckett left a paper trail, I'll find it." "You think it's still traceable?" Jack asked. "Jack," Noah said with a smirk, "everything is traceable. The truth's like blood, it seeps through eventually." Jack looked at the computers. "You're still running that same air-gapped system?" Noah nodded. "Better than the NSA's and harder to find than God's address. Nobody watches me out here." "That's the point." Jack pulled the USB from his coat and slid it over. "I scanned everything." Maggie Sloane's files, Creed's forged permits, even some records from the sheriff's old archive. Noah inserted it, already typing. Jack stood and walked to the window. Rain had started again, a slow patter on the tin roof. Shadow had curled by the door, but his ears stayed up. Jack turned back to Noah. "If you find the money trail, what then?" Noah didn't look up. "Then we follow it. And when we find out who's at the end of it, bankers, shell companies, political donors, you burn their whole empire to the ground." Jack was quiet for a moment. "Then you don't fight corruption with a badge, you fight it with a spotlight." Noah grinned. "That's a damn good line. I'm stealing that." By morning, the first pieces started coming together. Noah's screen showed a tangled web of transactions, real estate flips, fake development grants, and a network of shell companies tracing back to a Cayman Islands bank account under a name Jack recognized from Emily's old logbook, C. Whitmore Charities. "They used her name," Jack muttered, voice dark. "Yeah," Noah replied, not looking up. "And they funneled at least $8 million through it between 1995 and 2006. All off the books. All supposedly for rural health development and opioid rehabilitation centers. Want to guess how many centers were actually built?" Jack didn't answer. He didn't need to. Noah zoomed in on one name in the chain, Clayton Beckett, Charles's son. "He's running the show now," Noah said. "Daddy pulled the strings back then, but Junior's the one expanding into pharmaceuticals. He's your current devil." Jack felt the anger rise. So Emily didn't just die for what she uncovered. They turned her into a cover, a fake charity built on her grave. Noah nodded. And every time someone overdosed, they probably claimed a donation in her honor. Jack clenched his jaw. Noah turned to him, serious now. "You want to stop this? We can't just leak it. We have to time it right. I can scrub metadata, draft a full paper trail, but we'll need someone public to carry it." Jack thought for a long second. "Sheriff McKinney. He's old school," Noah said. "But if he's clean, he's our best bet." Jack's eyes narrowed. "And Creed?" Noah shrugged. "Could crack, especially if we show him what we've got on the next tier. Pressure makes cowards talk." Jack walked to the door, grabbing his coat. Shadow stood up beside him. "I'll get McKinney," Jack said. "You keep digging." Noah nodded. "And Jack, watch your back. This isn't just about one town anymore." Jack looked back at him. "No," he said. "It's about the truth they thought was too dead to matter." As he stepped out into the cold morning mist, Jack felt something shift. He wasn't just digging up a cold case anymore. He was lighting the fuse on something bigger. And now, with Noah pulling the strings, the storm wasn't coming. He was the storm. The sun had barely risen over the Appalachian ridgeline when Jack rolled back into Logan County, the truck tires humming low against the old asphalt. A fresh coat of frost kissed the edges of the fields, and the world looked still, almost innocent. But Jack knew better. Innocence didn't survive in a place built on silence and graves. Shadow stirred in the passenger seat, sensing the shift in his handler's mood. Jack reached over and scratched behind the dog's ear. "We're getting close now, boy," he said quietly. "Time to see who flinches first." Sheriff Earl McKinney was already waiting at the edge of the courthouse steps, a thermos in one hand and a manila folder in the other. He looked tired more than usual, like he'd aged 10 years in the past 10 days. Jack parked and stepped out, the morning cold cutting through his coat. "You got something for me?" McKinney asked, his eyes narrowing. "You have no idea," Jack replied, handing over the flash drive. Names, dates, money trails. Noah found everything. They laundered millions through a fake charity using Emily Whitmore's name. And that's just the tip. McKinney took the drive, his face grave. "And you trust this hacker of yours with my life?" McKinney looked away for a moment, then back. This ain't just some dirty deputy or a bad doc. You're talking about dismantling half the county's leadership." "Then maybe it's time we find out what the rest of it's worth," Jack said. "You said you wanted to reopen her case. This is it." The sheriff nodded slowly, tucking the flash drive into his coat. "All right. But we need something public. Something they can't bury." Jack pulled out the cassette recorder. "She speaks for herself." They stood in silence for a long moment, the wind threading between them. Then McKinney said, "You know what happens when this goes live, right? Beckett'll strike first." Jack's voice was cold. "Let him." 3 hours later, the town square was a boiling pot of nerves. McKinney had called a press conference under the guise of a development announcement. Reporters from Charleston and even Lexington started to trickle in, sensing something was off. Jack stood behind the courthouse, watching from the shadows. He wasn't the face of this. McKinney was. The sheriff's voice would carry weight, but if anything went wrong, Jack needed to be close. Shadow sat by his side, still as stone. Across the square, a black Cadillac pulled up. Charles Beckett. He stepped out, flanked by 2 suits and a woman Jack recognized from the mayor's office. Beckett wore his usual charm, like a mask, smiling, shaking hands, pretending the walls weren't closing in. But Jack saw it. A flicker of something behind the eyes. Doubt. Fear. McKinney stepped up to the podium, cleared his throat, and began. "Good morning. I'm not here to talk about zoning permits or town expansion. I'm here because it's time to speak the truth." Beckett froze, his smile faltering. McKinney continued, "In 1994, a woman named Emily Whitmore disappeared. She worked at St. Joseph's Free Clinic. Many said she ran away. Some said she was troubled. But we were wrong." He held up the recorder. "This is her voice. Her last words." The crowd shifted. Phones came out. The reporters leaned forward. McKinney hit play. Emily's voice spilled into the square, trembling but clear. "If you're hearing this, it means I was right to be afraid." Jack watched Beckett closely. The man stood still, at first composed. But as the recording named him, called him out for threats, blackmail, and abuse, his eyes darted toward his aides. One of them was already on a phone. The other started whispering to the mayor's rep. Emily's final words echoed, "He's here. Oh God, he found me." Silence followed. Then all hell broke loose. One reporter shouted, "Sheriff, are you saying Beckett is responsible? Another will charges be filed." McKinney raised both hands. "We have reopened the investigation. Evidence has been submitted to the state. No one is above the law." Beckett stepped forward now, voice loud and falsely calm. "This is slander. None of this has been proven yet," Jack said, stepping into view. Gasps rippled. Cameras turned. Beckett's face drained of color. "You," Beckett hissed. "That's right," Jack said. "You remember Emily. You remember what you did. And now the whole damn town does too." Beckett turned on McKinney. "You let this lunatic hijack a county investigation." McKinney didn't flinch. "I let justice speak for itself." Beckett took a step back. And that's when Marcus Creed appeared at the courthouse door. He looked haggard, pale, eyes red like he hadn't slept in days. "I have something to say," Creed called out. McKinney stepped aside. "Then say it." Creed took the podium, hand shaking as he adjusted the mic. "I lied," he said, voice cracking. I helped cover it all up. Emily knew what Beckett was doing. The pills, the fake charities, the shell companies. She had proof, and he killed her for it. We buried the ambulance in a ravine outside town. I watched it happen. I didn't stop it. I didn't stop him. The square exploded. Beckett tried to back away, but 2 deputies moved in. He shouted, raged, called it all fiction, but it was too late. The truth had found air. Back at the farmhouse hours later, Jack stood at the edge of the field. The old hole had been filled. The grass would take years to grow right. But for now, it was still. Shadow lay at his side, finally resting. Jack watched the wind ripple through the trees. He didn't feel triumph. Not exactly. More like peace. Heavy, sobering peace. The kind that comes when a voice is no longer lost. He lit a cigarette he didn't plan to finish. Behind him, Maggie Sloane pulled up in her rusted station wagon. She stepped out, walked to him slowly, and placed a single white lily in the dirt. "She can rest now," Maggie whispered. Jack nodded. "Yeah," he said. "But we don't. Not yet." Because the fire had started, and now the rot was burning. The county jail was quiet, too quiet for what had just gone down. Charles Beckett sat behind thick plexiglass cuffed to the steel bench, still dressed in his designer coat and scuffed wingtip shoes. The charm was gone. His smile was gone. What was left was raw eyes, bloodshot fingers, twitching sweat, dampening the collar of his shirt. He looked like a man who'd just seen a ghost and couldn't stop thinking it was still in the room. Jack Mercer sat across from him, elbows on the table, a small folder resting beneath his palm. "Thought you might want to get ahead of what's coming," Jack said, voice low. Beckett leaned back with a smirk that didn't reach his eyes. "You think this is over?" Jack didn't answer right away. He opened the folder and slowly spread out the contents, printed bank records, falsified contracts, charity transfer slips. Then he laid down a photo of a young boy, 12, maybe 13, his face bruised, eyes empty. Beckett's smirk vanished. "You remember him?" Jack asked. "His name's Leo Jameson. He overdosed last year on counterfeit oxy laced with fentanyl. The bottle came from a shell pharmacy that you funded through Whitmore Trust Holdings." "That's circumstantial," Beckett muttered. "No. It's intentional," Jack corrected. "You knew what those pills were. You buried Emily because she was going to expose it. And you built an empire off the corpses of people just like Leo." Beckett stared, a shadow flickering behind his eyes. "You've made your point," he said quietly. Jack leaned in. "No. You don't get to slither out this time. We're not just after a conviction. We're after the legacy. We're gonna salt the earth you built on lies." A long silence hung between them. Then Beckett chuckled, dry and hollow. "You think I was the king?" he said, voice shaking. "I was just a piece. You kill the bishop, but the board's still full." Jack narrowed his eyes. Beckett looked away. "Who else is involved, Beckett?" "You'll be dead before you get close," he muttered. "They see everything." Jack stood gathering the papers. "I'm not hiding. Let them come." He knocked on the glass twice. The guard entered to escort Beckett out. But before the door closed, Beckett turned back with a final bitter smile. "You're in over your head, Mercer. You think you've found the truth, but all you've done is kick open a bigger cage." Back at Maggie's house, Jack sat across from her and Sheriff McKinney. The living room was filled with case files, a whiteboard scrawled with names and arrows behind them. Shadow lay near the couch head, on his paws, eyes alert. Maggie lit a cigarette with shaking hands. So Beckett was just the front. Jack nodded. He just confirmed it, not that he meant to. There's a hierarchy behind this. Political money, pharmaceutical interests, state-level protection. McKinney ran a hand over his jaw. We need help. Jack nodded. Noah's already tracing the bigger wires, corporate donations, PACs, fake nonprofits. He's almost to the top. Maggie looked up. So what now? Jack stood and walked to the board. He circled one name, Senator Howard Trammell. A name just popped up twice in Noah's dig. First, in a land rezoning grant Beckett got for a recovery facility that never broke ground. Second, in a payment from Beckett's shell company directly to Trammell's campaign. McKinney looked grim. If that sticks, we're talking federal corruption. We need leverage, Jack said. Hard proof, a smoking gun. Maggie stood slowly. There might be something. They both turned to her. When Emily first came to me, Maggie said she mentioned a file. Not just clinic reports, something she said would blow the whole thing wide open. She said it was locked away somewhere safe in case she didn't make it. Jack straightened, where Maggie shook her head. She wouldn't tell me, said if anyone asked, I should say I didn't know. Jack thought for a long beat. She was smart. She'd want it somewhere hidden but reachable. Not a bank or a safety deposit box. Somewhere personal. He looked at Maggie. What about her old apartment? It's long gone. Burned down 3 years after she vanished. But her parents' place in Laurel Hollow. It's been boarded up since they died. No one's touched it. Jack grabbed his keys. Then that's where we're going. They reached the old Whitmore residence by dusk. The house stood alone on a crumbling hill road, half-eaten by ivy porch, rotted windows dark. A storm was gathering in the east wind, rushing through the trees like breath through teeth. Jack stepped out first. Shadow followed. Inside, the air smelled like mildew and silence. Jack moved slow flashlight sweeping across dust-covered furniture and mold-stained wallpaper. Maggie found a photo on the mantel, Emily as a girl standing next to her parents, smiling with a sunflower in her hand. She loved this place, Maggie whispered. Jack spotted an old bookshelf near the back. Something was off, its base didn't quite touch the floor. He crouched, pressing along the bottom edge. A click. He pulled and the shelf creaked forward, revealing a narrow crawl space. Inside was a single fireproof lockbox. Jack opened it carefully. Inside were 3 things: a leather-bound journal, a data cartridge labeled Clinic Archive 1994, and a Polaroid of Emily standing next to a rusted ambulance, the one they'd found buried. She knew, Jack whispered. She had it all. Maggie reached for the journal. This is everything. Jack turned toward the door, expression darkening. The wind had changed. Something was coming. The deeper we dig, the darker it gets, and we're not done yet. Back at the farmhouse, Noah was already waiting with his laptop fired up. When Jack handed him the cartridge, he whistled. Old school tech. But I can crack it. Within minutes, screens filled with clinic records, internal memos, shipment logs. One file stood out, Trammell Grant, Backdoor 94. Noah clicked it open. They found a memo from Beckett to Senator Trammell dated 6 weeks before Emily's disappearance, outlining the cover story for the grant money with a postscript EW has seen the logs. Recommend immediate action if exposure risk escalates. McKinney swore. That's conspiracy. Cross-state. We've got him. Noah kept digging. There's more. Names we haven't seen. DEA contacts. Pharma execs. One company shows up repeatedly, Alluvion Therapeutics. Jack leaned in. Time to expose the whole rotten tree. Shadow barked once, low short. Someone was outside. Jack moved to the window, hand on his sidearm. Headlights blinked once from the road. Whoever they were, they didn't come closer. Not yet. But Jack knew what it meant. They were being watched. And next time it wouldn't just be a warning. Lightning cracked across the mountains, like the earth itself was tearing open. Jack stood at the edge of Noah's porch, soaked in rain, staring out into the tree line where the headlights had vanished. He didn't need to see faces to know what the message was. Eyes were on them now. No more warnings. No more shadows. He walked back inside, soaked through, and shut the door. Shadow paced anxiously, hackles up. Noah locked every bolt and checked the motion sensors on his monitor. The farmhouse lights were off. They didn't need to broadcast their location any more than they already had. Inside the dim living room, Maggie and Sheriff McKinney hovered over a map littered with pins and markings. Supply routes, shell property deeds, flagged bank accounts. The storm outside was nothing compared to what they were about to unleash. They were watching the road, Jack said, wiping his face dry with a towel. They know we found the cartridge. They're not gonna let that slide, Noah muttered, tapping his keyboard rapidly. I traced Illuvian Therapeutics' server. They're wiping logs. Someone pulled the plug the second Trammel's name hit our radar. Jack crossed his arms. They're cleaning house. Fast. McKinney rubbed his temples. So we either dump everything now and risk it getting buried in noise, or we go louder. Higher. Jack shook his head. We don't just need media attention. We need federal leverage. FBI DEA somebody that Trammell and his crew can't buy. Got a name, Noah said. Special Agent Dana Bell. She used to be with the Bureau's Corruption Task Force. Quietly reassigned 2 years ago after blowing the whistle on a pharma bribery cover-up. She's clean. Real clean. Jack narrowed his eyes. Can you reach her? I already did, Noah said. Sent her an encrypted link to the archive. She wants a meet. When tonight? But it's gotta be off-grid. Jack exhaled slowly. The weight of the choice pressed against his ribs. Then we move now, he said. We take the truth to someone who still remembers what justice means. They split into 2 vehicles. Jack took the back roads with Maggie and Shadow, while Noah and McKinney rode with the encrypted drives. Their meeting point was an abandoned ranger station, up past Whispering Creek, an hour outside Logan, far enough from any digital interference, surrounded by nothing but trees, wind, and memory. By the time they reached the station, it was after midnight. The place looked deserted, broken windows, overgrown trails, the remnants of a long-dead forest program. But as Jack stepped out, a flashlight flicked once from the tree line. Then a woman emerged. She was in her early 40s, sharp eyes under a rain-slicked ball cap, carrying a compact Glock, and the calm posture of someone who had been through too many lies to ever flinch again. Agent Bell, Jack asked. She nodded. You Mercer, yeah. Good. Then let's cut the polite shit. Inside the ranger station, they spread everything out on a rotting table. The journal, the cartridge, the Beckett files, the voice tape. Dana Bell scrolled through the data with increasing intensity, her jaw tightening with every document she read. This is deeper than I thought, she muttered. This isn't just Trammell. You've got a full vertical conspiracy, private pharmaceutical labs, regional enforcement agencies, shell healthcare orgs, and political insulation. We're talking racketeering on a national scale. Jack folded his arms. So what's the play? Bell looked up. We leak it all and we disappear. Go into protection. No, Jack said. We go loud. On the record. McKinney frowned. That puts everyone at risk. Jack shook his head. The only reason they win is because we stay afraid. If we bury this in bureaucracy, they'll grind it down. But if the whole world sees it, every name, every dollar, every lie, they can't unring that bell. Bell considered him. You're willing to burn down the whole system. It's already burning, Jack said. We're just finally pointing to the fire. An hour later, they had a plan. Dana would forward the evidence packet to 3 trusted former colleagues who still had federal sway. At the same time, Jack and Noah would push the story through multiple national media outlets, ensuring it couldn't be buried or controlled. Noah set up timed releases across whistleblower forums, journalism networks, even darknet archives, every angle covered. You sure about this? He asked Jack. Jack looked down at Shadow, who sat beside Emily's photojournal. Yeah, he said. She didn't die for silence. Just as they were preparing to leave the station, the first gunshot split the night. It struck the window 2 feet from Maggie's head. Down, McKinney shouted, pulling her to the floor. Jack dove behind the doorway as bullets shredded the front wall. Shadow barked fiercely, fur bristling. Belle flipped the table and crouched beside it, drawing her weapon. Snipers in the ridge, she yelled. They tracked us. Noah cursed. God damn it, they were waiting. Basement access, McKinney shouted, pointing to a half-collapsed hatch behind the ranger's desk. Jack nodded, grabbing Maggie's arm. Go get her out! Shadow stayed close to Jack as they slid down the basement access tunnel, Belle and Noah covering the rear. The air was thick with dust and rot. Above, the sounds of boots on broken wood thudded through the walls. They're inside, Belle hissed. Noah yanked a pipe from the wall, jamming it through the hatch hinges. That'll buy us 10 seconds. They emerged in the woods behind the station, running downhill through wet underbrush. Gunfire cracked behind them, but they didn't stop. Jack led them into the gulch, across a shallow creek, into the trees where their second truck was stashed beneath camo netting. Belle jumped in and fired the engine. Drive now. Talk later. As the truck peeled out into the forest road, Jack glanced back through the trees. A flash of muzzle fire, then silence. They didn't follow. Not yet. They drove for over an hour in silence before stopping at a remote clearing Noah had used before, off-grid, unlisted, completely dark. Jack stepped out and walked away from the others for a moment, breathing hard, heart pounding. Belle joined him. They were ready to kill you for this, she said. Jack nodded. They still are. Belle glanced back at the truck where McKinney was comforting Maggie and Noah was checking the drive. You realize what this means, right? She said. Jack looked up at the sky stars just beginning to pierce the clouds. They won't stop, she continued. Not until they erase everything and everyone you've exposed. Jack's voice was steel. Then we make it so loud they can't erase it. We turn their silence into sirens. Belle watched him for a beat, then nodded. Then let's make some noise. The broadcast started at exactly 6:00 a.m. Eastern. The first image was simple, Emily Whitmore's photo, followed by the words, "She tried to speak. Now we speak for her." Then came the documents, the audio tapes, the journal entries, the shipment records, Beckett's confession, Creed's admission, Senator Trammell's emails, Alluvion Therapeutics payout trail, medical invoices, faked clinics, emptied opioids, redistributed lives ruined. Every file, every word, every shadow exposed. By 6:04, the servers hosting the leak were already under cyber attack. But it was too late. At 6:07, the hashtag Justice for Emily hit trending in 15 states. At 6:13, a senior DEA official tweeted that an internal probe was being launched into Appalachian pharmaceutical distribution channels. By 6:30, 3 news anchors had broken down crying on air. Jack watched it unfold from the safety of a forgotten ranger outpost miles away. He sat in the half-dark, knees bent, arms crossed, Shadow's head resting against his boot. He didn't smile. Not yet. This wasn't about victory. It was about volume, about drowning out years of silence. "They're listening," Noah said behind him, reading Twitter feeds aloud like battle updates. 3 federal subpoenas issued. Trammell's residence in D.C. just got raided. Maggie looked over, her voice barely above a whisper. "We actually did it." But Jack didn't move. He was staring at the wall. Past it. Through it. He could feel it. The storm wasn't over. It was circling. Truth always costs something. And our bill hasn't come due yet. They didn't have to wait long. By noon, Dana Bell's contact in the Bureau warned her that a black bag unit off the books was en route to retrieve compromised materials and silence risk. "They're not coming to talk," Bell said, reloading her sidearm. "They're coming to erase." Jack stood, grabbing his gear. "Then we don't wait around." McKinney scanned the radio band. "They're shutting down roads. Unmarked checkpoints south of County Line, north of Hollister Ridge. They're boxing us in," Noah muttered. "Not us," Jack said. "Me." They all turned to him. "I'll run. Draw them out. You 3 get the data to Bell's safe contact in Charleston. Deliver it by hand. No digital trail." "You're not doing this alone," Maggie said firmly. "You have to," Bell added, cutting her off. "If they get the drives, it all dies in silence." Jack looked at her, then at McKinney, then finally Maggie. This was never about surviving it. It was about finishing it. Maggie stepped forward, eyes welling. "Don't you dare act like you're disposable." "I'm already marked," Jack said gently. "We all are. But I've got history in these woods. They'll follow me." Shadow rose to his feet, tail-stiff eyes locked on Jack. "Looks like I'm not going alone anyway," Jack murmured. By 2:15 p.m., Jack and Shadow were deep in the high mountain woods, weaving through old moonshiner trails and logging roads even GPS couldn't find. Behind them, 3 black SUVs, armored, silent, methodical. Jack could feel the pursuit tightening like a noose. He ducked into an abandoned coal shaft, lit a flare, and set up a tripwire charge just enough to rattle, not kill. He didn't want blood, just distance. The flare lit the shaft like an artery pulsing red. Shadow crouched beside him, ears alert. "They want to make ghosts out of us, boy," Jack whispered. "But not today." Meanwhile, Noah, Maggie McKinney, and Dana Bell drove a rusted county emergency van down a narrow gravel pass toward Charleston. The drives were packed inside a modified medical cooler, Noah's idea: hide in plain sight. Bell checked her burner phone. "My contact is waiting at Riverfront Park. There's only a 10-minute window." "What happens after that?" McKinney asked. "He disappears," Bell said flatly. "And so does our shot." Back in the forest, Jack led the SUVs into an old firebreak. The road ended at a dead cliff, one way and no way out. Unless you knew the trail on foot. He stopped. Waited. The first SUV appeared, then the second. They advanced slowly, cautiously. Jack raised both hands from behind a broken log. "You found me," he called. "Congratulations." 3 men stepped out. No insignias, no names. One of them raised a rifle. "You've made a lot of noise," Mercer, the lead one, said. "Too much noise." Jack stared him down. "You burn one forest to the ground." Jack said, "Sometimes you see what's been hiding in the trees. Give us the drives. You're already too late." The lead man gave a cold smile. "That's never stopped us before." Before they could step closer, the tripwire triggered. A concussive boom shook the trees. Smoke clouded the ravine. Shadow took off into the underbrush. Jack followed. At 3:05 p.m., Bell's team reached Charleston. They parked behind the amphitheater. A tall woman in a gray coat stood near the river, hands tucked in her sleeves, a quiet calm around her. Bell approached, gave the code phrase. The woman nodded, took the cooler, and left without another word. It was done. In the mountains, Jack doubled back, watching the SUVs from above. One had caught fire. The others were stalled agents, disoriented. But they were regrouping fast. Shadow limped beside him. He'd caught debris from the blast. Jack knelt down, ran a hand along the dog's neck. I'm not letting them end this here. He looked out at the horizon, saw the faint hint of smoke from Charleston's skyline miles away. That meant the handoff had worked. It was worth it. He turned back toward the firebreak, shoulders squared. Let them come. In a federal office hours later, a young reporter sat across from the woman in gray. She slid a flash drive across the desk. What is this? He asked. She leaned in, calm and razor-sharp, the whole truth. He picked it up, brows furrowed. Why me? Because you're the last one still asking real questions. He looked down at the drive, then back up. I'm going to lose my job for this, or you'll win the country back. By nightfall, networks across the nation were frozen in shock. A whistleblower bombshell. Names, faces, companies. Federal and state collusion. Appalachia wasn't a blip anymore. It was a wound ripped open. And the voice they kept playing again and again wasn't that of a politician. It was Emily Whitmore. Her cassette, her words, her truth. Jack and Shadow huddled under a ledge as rain began to fall again. Distant helicopters chopped overhead, but none spotted them. Jack leaned back, letting the water run down his face. He didn't feel relief. Not yet. But for the first time in a long time, he didn't feel alone either. Shadow nudged closer. Jack exhaled. Almost there. One more step. One more reckoning. The final burn was coming. It was 3 days before the helicopters left the mountains. By then, the whole country had changed. Networks ran special reports around the clock. Headlines read like fiction, opioid empire exposed, senator implicated in death, cover-up, whistleblower files, rock Washington. But it wasn't fiction, it was real, ugly, painful, and long overdue. Emily Whitmore's name had become more than a headline. She was a symbol. Her photo, young, hopeful, brave, was everywhere. Candlelight vigils in small towns. Billboards on interstates. Hashtags painted across buildings in spray paint and tears. And in the middle of it all, Jack Mercer vanished. No press, no cameras, no grand statement. He just disappeared into the place he'd always belonged, somewhere between the trees and the truth. Jack stood at the edge of the ridge overlooking the hollow, where Emily's bones had finally been laid to rest. Not in a numbered grave, not beneath silence, but under a plaque freshly carved. She told the truth, and the world listened. The earth was soft beneath his boots. The fall wind rustled the oak branches, scattering amber leaves across the grass. Shadow sat beside him, tail gently sweeping the dirt, healed but moving slower, now older like Jack. Maggie stepped up next to him, hands in the pockets of her worn coat. She didn't say anything at first. She didn't need to. The silence between them wasn't empty anymore. It was full. Of memories of sacrifice, of things neither of them had the words to name. They're naming the clinic after her, Maggie finally said. The new one. State-funded. Real doctors. Real oversight. Jack nodded. She'd like that. And McKinney, she asked. Still sheriff. For now, Jack said. He turned down the DC spotlight. Said he wasn't done cleaning up here. Maggie smiled faintly. Maybe none of us are. Jack's eyes stayed on the tree line. What about you still writing, she said. Thought about walking away from it all. But someone has to keep reminding people why it mattered. Why it still matters. She handed him a small book. Leather-bound. Old. Worn from years of being handled carefully. Emily's journal. Maggie had made copies. The original belonged here now. Jack knelt and laid it beneath the plaque, tucking it between the roots of a dogwood tree. She carried the truth when no one else would, he murmured. We just helped it breathe. He stood again, brushing the dirt from his hands. You can bury a body, Maggie, but not a voice. She nodded, holding back tears. They stayed there a while longer, watching the wind dance across the hollow. The world still turned, still stumbled forward. But for once, something had shifted. Not in politics, not in headlines, but in people, in how they looked at their neighbors, in how they listened. Emily's death didn't just expose corruption. It reminded a country how to care again. In a small federal courtroom in West Virginia, Charles Beckett pled guilty to conspiracy, obstruction of justice, and manslaughter. He never looked up from the table. Senator Trammell's case was headed to a federal grand jury. He claimed ignorance, claimed isolation. But the paper trail wrapped around his neck like a noose. Dozens more were named, indicted, fired, investigated. For once, justice didn't knock quietly. It kicked the door off the hinges. Back in Logan County, the Whitmore Clinic opened its doors. The first patient through was a teenage boy recovering from an overdose. His mother cried when she saw the name on the building. Volunteers stood on the porch in blue jackets, handing out pamphlets. Maggie was inside, notebook in hand, watching, recording, honoring. Jack didn't attend the opening. He wasn't built for ceremony. Instead, he took shadow and disappeared into the mountain trails, places only he knew. He checked traps, patched fences, helped rebuild a neighbor's porch. Quiet things, honest things. He never stopped moving, but he didn't run anymore. He didn't have to. People remembered now. People acted now. Not because someone told them to, because they chose to. One night a package arrived at Maggie's doorstep. No return address. Inside was a cassette. Her heart nearly stopped. She played it. Jack's voice grainy but strong. You once told me every story needs a witness. I guess this one needed more than that. It needed a chorus. Emily started it. You carried it. And now maybe, just maybe, the world's singing with you. She smiled through her tears. There was no goodbye, no farewell. Just the rustle of wind, the bark of a dog, and a long pause before the tape clicked off. Months later, someone spotted a man in the Ozarks walking with a black dog. He helped fix a water pump, didn't leave his name, just shook hands and kept moving. Some said it wasn't him. Others said it had to be. But the truth was never really about Jack Mercer. It was about what he made possible. One woman spoke. One town listened. One nation woke up. And that was enough. Because silence may bury the dead, but truth digs them back up.